On April 11, 2026, two U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyers cut through the Gulf of Oman and entered the Strait of Hormuz. No permission requested, no diplomatic clearance obtained, just hull steel moving through contested water while the world held its breath. This was not a patrol, this was a declaration. The USS Frankie Peterson and USS Michael Murphy transited the strait with their weapons systems active and their mine-clearing mission publicly announced by U.S. Central Command. Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of CENTCOM, stated directly. Today, we began the process of establishing a new passage, and we will share this safe pathway with the maritime industry soon to encourage the free flow of commerce. A new passage, not a request, not a negotiation. The United States Navy was physically entering the Strait of Hormuz, clearing Iran's mines and telling the global shipping industry that the road was being reopened whether Tehran agreed or not. To understand the full weight of that moment, you need to understand what came before it, what the United States has assembled in those waters, and why the country that spent 42 days controlling the world's most critical energy choke point has now, at least temporarily, stepped back. Let's go back to the beginning. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. Coordinated airstrikes hit Iran across multiple locations. Iran's supreme leader was killed. Nuclear sites were struck. The IRG responded with hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles targeting U.S. military installations across Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, and Iran did what it had threatened for decades. It closed the Strait of Hormuz, not symbolically, physically. IRG fast boats attacked merchant vessels, naval mines were laid in the shipping lanes. Within days, Maersk, CMACGM, and Hapag-Lloyd suspended all transits. By March 2nd, no commercial tankers were broadcasting automatic identification system signals in the strait. War risk insurance clauses were invoked. The waterway went dark. What that closure actually means is measured in numbers that are staggering in their scale. The Strait of Hormuz is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, with two narrow shipping lanes. Through those lanes normally flows 20–25% of the world's seaborne oil, roughly 20 million barrels per day. That figure includes 20% of global liquefied natural gas, as well as sulfur, helium, aluminum, petrochemicals, polymers, fertilizer feedstocks, and plastics. All of it stopped in a single waterway by a nation that had just watched its supreme leader die under American bombs. By the most conservative estimates, cumulative supply disruption has now exceeded 500 million barrels of oil equivalent since the closure began. The IMF warned this week that global growth will take a measurable hit even if the ceasefire holds, describing Hormuz uncertainty as a persistent drag on energy costs and inflation. Analysts at Claypool estimated peak disruptions of approximately 13 million barrels of crude, condensates, and natural gas liquids per day. They also warned that even an immediate deal announcement would not quickly reverse the damage. It could take months for shipping, insurance, and production chains to return to pre-war levels. This is the environment in which the United States made a series of sequential moves that have fundamentally shifted the operational reality. In the strait, the first move was the blockade. The Islamabad talks of April 12 lasted 21 hours. Vice President G. Vance sat across from Iranian Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, with Pakistani Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir physically present in the room. The talks collapsed. Iran refused a 20-year pause on uranium enrichment, insisting on 5 years maximum. Iran refused to fully relinquish control of the strait. Vance left. Within hours, President Trump announced a U.S. naval blockade not of the strait itself, but of all Iranian ports, every ship entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas. The blockade went into effect at a.m. on April 13th. CENTCOM announced it had halted sea trade into and out of Iran, turning back 28 ships in the first week. Trump described the operation on Truth Social as costing Iran $500 million per day. Iran's oil exports, already severely degraded, were now being strangled from both directions. The Hormuz closure blocked Iranian exports from leaving by sea. The U.S. blockade blocked imports from reaching Iran. Tehran was being compressed into a box, no revenue in, no goods in, a military-industrial complex running out of components, refineries operating on degraded inputs, a population already suffering from the war and from the brutal crackdown that killed thousands of civilians during the January 2026 protests. The second move was the mine clearance operation. On April 11th, the Peterson and the Murphy transited the strait, the first American warships to do so since the war began. What happened next is revealing. Iran's standing order was explicit. Any military vessel approaching the strait will be dealt with severely. The IRG Navy had fired on multiple merchant vessels in preceding weeks. The American destroyers entered. Iran did nothing, not a shot fired. Not a fast boat deployed. Complete silence from the force that had been conducting maritime attacks for weeks. That silence told Washington something important, and U.S. intelligence reporting confirmed part of the reason why. Iran had placed mines in the strait's shipping lanes and subsequently lost track of at least some of them. That is not a minor operational problem. It is a strategic liability of enormous consequence. Iran cannot fully open a waterway it has mined without knowing exactly where those mines are. It cannot guarantee safe passage for friendly nations it wants to exempt from the blockade. The strait Iran closed is, in a very real operational sense, partially beyond Iran's own control, and the United States is now clearing it. USS Pioneer and USS Chief, two Avenger-class minesweepers based in Japan, transited the South China Sea and stopped in Singapore. They are en route to the U.S. Fifth Fleet. USS Carney, USS Santa Barbara, and USS Tulsa, equipped with purpose-built mine countermeasures packages, are already in the theater. Underwater drone systems operated by the Navy's Explosive Ordnance Disposal Community are actively deployed. Washington is not asking Tehran's permission. It is clearing the mines unilaterally, treating the strait as international waters and acting accordingly. The third move is the force multiplication that has produced the most significant shift in Iran's calculations. The USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, the largest warship ever built, displacing 100,000 tons and carrying 75 aircraft with over 5,000 crew, is operating in the region. The USS Abraham Lincoln arrived in the CENTCOM area of responsibility in January 2026 and participated in the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury. Both carrier strike groups are positioned near the Persian Gulf, each accompanied by Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers. On April 14th, Stars and Stripes reported that a third carrier strike group, the USS George Hugh Bush, CVN-77, with carrier Air Wing 7, 5,000 sailors, and escorts including the destroyers USS Mason, USS Ross, and USS Donald Cook, is en route. It is transiting via the southwestern coast of Africa to avoid the Suez Canal and the Houthi threat in the Red Sea. When the George Hugh Bush arrives, the United States will have approximately 27 Navy vessels deployed in the region, roughly 41% of all U.S. ships actively deployed and operating at sea worldwide. 3. Aircraft carrier strike groups, over 225 strike aircraft between the three carriers, roughly 165,000 sailors and Marines in theater and growing. Retired Admiral James Stavridis told CNN that fully controlling both the entrance and interior of the Strait of Hormuz requires two carriers, more than a dozen destroyers, and participation from Gulf Arab navies. The United States now has all of that, with a third carrier approaching. This is what Iran is looking at, and it is this strategic reality that produced what happened on April 17th. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that the Strait of Hormuz was fully open and ready for passage. Oil prices dropped 11% within hours. Trump celebrated on Truth Social. For approximately 24 hours, it appeared the strait might genuinely reopen. Then the IRG issued its own statement. Control of the Strait of Hormuz had returned to its previous state. IRG gunboats fired on merchant vessels attempting to transit. Indian-flagged ships came under fire. France's CMA-CGM received warning shots. A UK maritime authority reported IRG gunboats attacking a tanker. The strait closed again. This moment reveals what is perhaps the most important structural fact of this entire conflict. There are two Irans in this negotiation. There is Foreign Minister Araghchi, experienced, sophisticated, the architect of the 2015 JIPOA nuclear deal, and there is the IRG military apparatus, aligned with the new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei. Parliamentary Speaker Galibaf told Iranian state television, "It is impossible for others to pass through the Strait of Hormuz while we cannot. That is not a negotiating position, that is an ideology." CNN's reporting confirms that U.S. officials have identified a significant divide between Iran's negotiating team and the IRG military leadership. The men who can make a deal are not the men who control the guns. The men who control the guns will not make a deal. Meanwhile, Iran's parliament is moving to institutionalize its leverage before that leverage is physically removed. An IRG-affiliated parliamentarian announced plans for legislation mandating that ships from hostile countries cannot transit the strait at all, and that others must pay tolls. This is not the legislative agenda of a country that believes it has lost. It is the agenda of a country racing to codify control before American minesweepers complete their work. And this race has consequences beyond the battlefield. The Hormuz closure has spiked LNG prices. Fertilizer production across the northern hemisphere has been disrupted. If the closure extends into May and June, fertilizer prices could average 15 to 20% higher. That translates into food price inflation. Gasoline in the United States is already above $4 per gallon. Analysts warn that if Brent crude reaches $130 to $150 per barrel, U.S. gasoline could hit $8 to $9. This is the economic logic driving Washington's escalation, but there is risk embedded in the structure. The IRG has threatened oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, and the way countries that host U.S. military forces. If a mine detonates under USS Pioneer, if an IRG-fast boat fires on USS Peterson, the escalation chain produces exactly the regional war Gulf states are trying to avoid. The ceasefire has been extended. At Pakistan's request, the blockade remains. Mine clearance continues. The USS George Hugh Bush is days away. Iran's leverage over Hormuz is being physically dismantled, not through negotiation, through minesweepers, destroyers, and carrier air wings. Approximately 500 to 700 large vessels remain trapped in the Gulf. Transits remain below 10% of typical flow. Iran has stepped back for now, but it has not surrendered. The mines are still in the water. The URG is still armed. The third carrier strike group is on its way. The question is no longer whether the Strait of Hormuz is open or closed. The question is whether it will reopen under negotiated terms or reopen because American steel forced it open. The clock is running, and this time it is measured in the speed of American minesweepers.